Most people will spend their entire lives earning more money and wondering why they never seem to have any. Not because they lack discipline, not because they lack opportunity, but because there is a system operating inside their financial life quietly, continuously pulling wealth outward before it ever has a chance to stay. Solomon identified this pattern thousands of years ago and encoded the warning in a single verse that most people read once and never truly understand. The problem was never your income. It was the invisible structure you built around it. If this challenges you, stay until the end. There is a pattern most people never see, not because it is hidden from them, but because it looks exactly like progress. Every morning, millions of people wake up, go to work, earn money, spend money, and return to the same financial position they were in the year before. Some earn more than they did 5 years ago. Some earn significantly more. And yet the distance between where they stand and where they want to be financially has not changed in any meaningful way. This is not a coincidence. It is a structure. Banned structures, once understood, can be dismantled. What you are about to hear is not a motivational message. It is not a strategy for making more money quickly. It is something far more useful and far more uncomfortable. It is an explanation of the invisible system that has been quietly removing wealth from your life before you ever had a chance to keep it. Consider a simple observation. 2 men work at the same company. They earn nearly identical salaries. They have similar levels of education, similar life expenses, and similar access to financial information. One of them, after 10 years, has accumulated a level of financial stability that gives him genuine options in life. The other, after the same 10 years, remains exactly one missed paycheck away from financial difficulty. No inheritance separated them. No extraordinary opportunity arrived for one and not the other. What separated them was invisible to most observers. It was not income, it was not intelligence, it was not luck. It was the presence, in one man's financial life, of a quiet and continuous drain, a behavioral pattern so normalized that it felt like simply living. A system that pulled money outward as consistently as it arrived inward. That system has a name, and understanding it is the beginning of something most people never reach. Modern financial culture teaches one thing above everything else: earn more. The assumption is straightforward. If you earn more, you accumulate more. If you accumulate more, you become wealthy. Therefore, the primary objective of financial life is to increase income as rapidly as possible. This assumption feels logical. It is also, for most people, the reason they remain financially unstable for decades. Because the assumption ignores something. It ignores what happens to money after it arrives. In modern society, the moment money enters a person's life, it immediately encounters a series of forces designed not through conspiracy, but through cultural conditioning to pull it back out as quickly as possible. Lifestyle upgrades that follow income increases almost automatically. Visible purchases that signal financial status to the outside world. Emotional spending that rewards effort with consumption. Rapid investment chasing that mistakes speed for strategy. These forces do not feel dangerous. They feel earned. They feel normal. They feel like participation in the kind of life a person is supposed to want. And they are precisely what ensures that most people, regardless of income level, never accumulate lasting wealth. This observation is not new. Long before modern financial markets existed, before investment portfolios and digital banking and economic complexity, an ancient king documented this precise behavioral pattern. His name was Solomon. Solomon is historically associated with a level of wealth so significant that it became the standard of comparison for centuries after his death. But what remains more interesting than the scale of his wealth is the body of recorded wisdom he left behind regarding the behavior of money and the behavior of people who interact with it. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 13, verse 11, Solomon wrote a sentence that has survived thousands of years, largely unchanged in its meaning. He observed that wealth gathered quickly tends to diminish, but wealth accumulated gradually, through discipline and patience, tends to grow. Read it once, and it sounds simple, almost too simple. Read it again, with careful attention, and something more precise begins to emerge. Solomon was not merely warning against greed or impatience. He was documenting a behavioral phenomenon. He was observing that the speed at which a person seeks to build wealth is directly connected to the speed at which wealth disappears from their life. He was identifying a structural relationship between behavior and financial outcome, not as a moral lesson, but as an observation about how money actually moves. And the world he observed was, in its essential human psychology, identical to the one we inhabit today. Here is the assumption that must be broken before anything else can be understood clearly. Most people believe that financial progress is primarily determined by income level. They believe that a person earning $100,000 per year is, almost by definition, closer to financial stability than a person earning $40,000. They believe that the primary barrier between themselves and wealth is the size of their paycheck. This belief is so embedded in modern thinking that questioning it feels almost irrational. And yet the evidence surrounding us suggests otherwise. There are people earning modest incomes who quietly build financial stability over years. Not through extraordinary investment returns, not through inheritance, but simply through a structural discipline that prevents money from escaping before it can accumulate. There are people earning high incomes who remain, despite all appearances, financially fragile because the environment around their money is constructed in a way that ensures it never stays long enough to compound. Income matters. But income is not the primary variable. The primary variable is what happens to money after it arrives. And most people have never examined that variable with any real seriousness. This brings us to the mechanism itself. Call it the wealth vacuum protocol. Not a single habit, not a single mistake. A system, a behavioral system that operates in the background of a person's financial life, consistently and quietly pulling money away from accumulation before it has the opportunity to grow. The wealth vacuum protocol operates through three channels. The first is speed, the belief that financial progress requires constant financial movement. More investments, more opportunities, more activity. When a person operates from this belief, they are perpetually moving money, and money in motion cannot accumulate. Speed feels productive. Speed feels ambitious. But speed, applied to wealth building before a stable foundation exists, is one of the most consistent destroyers of financial progress. The second channel is visibility. Human beings are social creatures, and wealth behavior in social environments is shaped heavily by the desire to be perceived as successful. Visible spending, the kind that communicates status, achievement, and progress to the people around us, is one of the most normalized financial drains in existence. It does not feel like a drain. It feels like enjoying the fruits of one's effort. But visible spending consistently redirects money away from accumulation and toward external perception management. The third channel is emotional spending. Money's not merely a financial instrument for most people. It is emotionally significant. It feels like reward. It feels like freedom. It feels like relief. And so it gets spent in response to emotional states, stress, celebration, fatigue, satisfaction, rather than in response to a structured financial plan. Emotional spending is not excessive in any individual instance. It is continuous. And continuous small outflows, sustained over years, produce significant financial erosion. Together, these three channels form a system that functions like a vacuum. Regardless of how much money enters, the system ensures that a consistent portion of it is always being pulled outward. And because the system operates through behaviors that feel normal, feel earned, and feel culturally encouraged, most people never identify it as the source of their financial stagnation. They simply earn more and watch it disappear the same way. Solomon's observation in Proverbs was not, at its core, a warning about impatience. It was a warning about structure. Wealth gathered hastily diminishes, not because speed is morally wrong, but because speed, in the context of wealth building, is incompatible with the conditions that allow accumulation to occur. To accumulate, money must stay. To stay, money must exist in an environment where the forces pulling it outward have been deliberately reduced. This is not a complicated idea, but it requires a fundamental shift in how a person understands their own financial life. Most people manage their money from the outside in. They focus on what comes in, what they can grow, what they can earn next. They treat wealth as something to chase, something that exists out there, and that sufficient effort will eventually bring within reach. Disciplined families, the ones who build financial stability quietly across generations, operate from a fundamentally different orientation. They manage money from the inside out. They focus first on what stays, on the structural conditions within their financial environment, on the removal of the forces that drain accumulation. They are not passive. They are not avoiding opportunity. They are doing something more precise and more difficult. They are building an environment in which wealth can exist without being immediately consumed. There is a question worth sitting with before continuing. Think about your own financial life for a moment. Not the income you earn, not the investments you have considered, not the opportunities you have pursued. Think about the environment your money enters when it arrives. Is that environment structured to keep money? Or is it structured through habits, through social pressures, through emotional patterns, to release money as quickly as it comes in? Most people, when they examine this honestly for the first time, recognize something uncomfortable. They have spent years focused entirely on earning more money, and almost no time building an environment capable of holding it. This is the precise condition the wealth vacuum protocol was designed to expose. And what comes next is the structural layer underneath it, the mechanism that disciplined families have quietly applied for generations, while most of the world continued chasing faster and louder. The rule is simple. Its application is not. But once it becomes part of how you see money, you will not be able to unsee it. There is a rule that disciplined families do not advertise. Not because it is secret, but because it is quiet by nature. And quiet things rarely survive in environments built around noise. The rule is this: wealth grows only when the systems that drain it have been removed first. Not reduced. Not managed. Removed. This is the vacuum discipline rule. And it is the structural foundation beneath every lasting accumulation of wealth that has ever existed, not as theory, but as observable pattern across centuries of financial behavior. Most people approach wealth building as a process of addition. Add income, add investments, add opportunities, add financial activity. The assumption is that enough addition, sustained over enough time, eventually produces wealth. What the vacuum discipline rule reveals is that addition, applied to a leaking structure, produces nothing but the illusion of progress. Imagine filling a vessel with water. The vessel has small holes along its base, not large enough to be immediately visible, but consistent enough to ensure that whatever enters, slowly exits. A person focused entirely on addition pours water in continuously, notices the level never rises significantly, and concludes that they simply need to pour faster. The person who understands the vacuum discipline rule puts down the water and examines the vessel first. This is not a metaphor for passivity, it is a metaphor for sequence. The correct sequence of wealth building begins not with growth, but with structural repair. Solomon's observation returns here with greater precision. When he wrote that wealth gathered hastily diminishes, he was not describing a moral outcome, he was describing a mechanical one. Wealth that enters a structurally compromised financial environment, one filled with the vacuum behaviors described earlier, cannot stay. Not because the person lacks intelligence or ambition, but because the environment itself is designed, through accumulated habits, to release money continuously. Ancient households that maintained wealth across generations understood this at a practical level. They did not primarily ask, "How do we earn more?" They asked, "What in our current structure is pulling wealth away from us?" This distinction sounds subtle. It is, in practice, the entire difference between financial stability and financial fragility. A household asking how to earn more will build its life around income-seeking behavior, constant movement, constant opportunity assessment, constant financial activity. These behaviors feel productive, and occasionally they produce short-term gains. But a household asking what is pulling wealth away will build its life around something slower, quieter, and more structurally sound. It will audit its financial environment. It will identify the patterns that drain accumulation, and it will remove them systematically, without drama, without the need for external recognition. Over 10 years, the difference between these two households becomes impossible to ignore. The first structural principle of the vacuum discipline rule is called retention before expansion. It operates from a simple premise: what cannot be kept cannot be grown. This principle runs directly against the instinct that most people bring to their financial lives. The instinct is to grow first, to expand first, to seek returns before stability has been established. The logic feels sound. If money is growing, why worry about what stays? But growth built on an unstable foundation is temporary. It inflates, and then it corrects. And when it corrects, people who had not retained anything discover that the growth they experienced left no residue in their actual financial position. Disciplined families practice retention as a primary discipline. Before any expansion is considered, a question is asked: is the current financial structure retaining what already arrives? If the answer is no, expansion is postponed. Not forever, but until the structural conditions for retention have been established. This feels counterintuitive in an environment that celebrates constant growth. It requires the ability to sit with financial stillness, to allow money to accumulate without immediately directing it towards something new. That ability is rarer than most people realize, and it is more valuable than most financial strategies combined. The second structural principle is financial silence. Wealth, as a behavioral phenomenon, is sensitive to social environment. When a person's financial life is visible, when income levels are known, when lifestyle communicates financial status, when spending reflects the desire to signal progress, the environment around that person's money becomes pressurized. Social comparison creates lifestyle inflation. External perception management redirects money from accumulation toward appearance. Financial decisions get made, subtly and continuously, in response to how they will be perceived rather than how they serve long-term structure. Financial silence is the deliberate practice of removing wealth from social visibility. This does not mean poverty signaling or false modesty. It means understanding that the quieter a person's financial life remains, the less external pressure exists to spend in ways that serve perception rather than accumulation. Historically, the families that maintained wealth across generations were rarely the most visibly wealthy in their communities. They were often, to casual observers, surprisingly modest in their daily presentation. This was not accidental. It was structural. Silence protected their accumulation from the social forces that drain it. As Solomon observed through the broader wisdom literature he produced, the wise do not broadcast their resources. Not from insecurity, from discipline. Noise destroys accumulation. Quiet systems outlast loud strategies. This is as true today as it was in the ancient world. Here is where the psychological reframe becomes necessary. Most people, when they examine their financial behavior honestly, discover that they have been operating from the identity of a money chaser, not in a reckless way. Not in a way they would readily recognize or label, but in the way that the mind organizes financial life around pursuit, around what can be earned next, what can be grown next, what opportunity can be captured next. The money chaser identity is not a moral failure. It is a cultural default. It is what modern financial environments produce when a person absorbs their assumptions about wealth from the world around them. But it is incompatible with lasting accumulation, because the money chaser, by identity, is always in motion. And money in constant motion cannot compound. The identity that produces stable, generational wealth is different. Call it the wealth protector. The wealth protector is not passive. They are not disengaged from financial life. But their orientation is fundamentally different from the money chasers. Where the money chaser asks, "What can I pursue?" the wealth protector asks, "What must I guard?" Where the money chaser sees opportunity as the primary currency of financial life, the wealth protector sees structure as the primary currency. Where the money chaser is energized by financial activity, the wealth protector is stabilized by financial discipline. This identity shift is not achieved by reading a principle once and nodding in agreement. It is built through repeated decisions, small, daily, quiet decisions that gradually reorient how a person relates to money at a fundamental level. Ancient households understood this well. Wealth is not primarily a financial condition. It is a psychological one, and the psychological structure must precede the financial outcome. There is a reframe that modern culture resists almost entirely. The obsession with constant financial movement, more income streams, more investments, more side ventures, more strategies, is not the path to wealth for most people. It is, for most people, one of the primary mechanisms of the wealth vacuum itself. Every new financial pursuit requires attention, resources, and often, capital. Every new opportunity assessed and acted upon creates transaction costs, not just financial, but cognitive and behavioral. The person perpetually in pursuit of the next financial strategy is rarely building the structural conditions for wealth to accumulate quietly in the background. They are, instead, feeding the vacuum, keeping money in motion, ensuring it never stays long enough to compound. Patience compounds. This is not a soft idea or a consolation for lack of ambition. It is a structural reality. Money that stays within a disciplined environment, protected from the vacuum behaviors of speed and visibility and emotional spending, accumulates in ways that no strategy built on financial acceleration can replicate over time. The anti-hustle positioning is not an argument for laziness. It is an argument for precision. Do less, but do it with structural intention. Protect more than you pursue. Retain before you expand. And allow time, steady, unremarkable, quiet time, to perform the work that financial noise never can. Discipline at this level requires a practice, not a strategy, a practice. Each evening, before the day closes, spend 5 minutes reviewing the financial outflows of that day, not to judge them, not to celebrate or punish, simply to see them. Where did money move outward today? Was that movement intentional, or was it reactive? Was it structural, serving a plan, or was it emotional, serving a feeling that is now past? This daily review is not about deprivation. It is about awareness. And awareness, sustained over weeks and months, begins to reshape behavior in ways that no single decision ever could. Small leaks, identified early, can be closed before they become patterns. And it is patterns, not individual decisions, that determine financial outcomes over time. Disciplined families practice this quietly, not as a burden, as a ritual of guardianship. The same quiet attention that a careful steward brings to anything worth protecting. A calm warning before closing. Impatience is the mechanism through which the wealth vacuum does most of its damage. It arrives dressed as ambition. It feels like urgency. It presents itself as the voice of reason, telling you that slow accumulation is not enough, that others are moving faster, that the window of opportunity is closing. Impatience will redirect you from structure to pursuit every time it is allowed to speak without examination. Solomon's warning in Proverbs was not merely historical, it was anticipatory. He observed human financial behavior with enough clarity to understand that the hunger for rapid wealth would always be the primary vehicle through which wealth disappears. The wise gather slowly, not because speed is unavailable to them, but because they understand what speed costs in the long run. Every year of disciplined retention, quietly compounding in a protected financial environment, is building something that years of frantic financial activity cannot replicate. Time, applied to a structurally sound financial environment, is the most powerful wealth instrument available to any person at any income level, and it requires nothing except the discipline to stop draining what you have worked to build. Return now to Proverbs 13:11. Wealth gathered hastily diminishes. Wealth accumulated gradually grows. Solomon was not offering comfort to the slow. He was identifying the single most reliable pattern in the financial behavior of human beings across every era he could observe. The pattern has not changed. The names of the currencies have changed. The complexity of the markets has changed. The speed of information has changed. But the human relationship with money, the impatience, the visibility seeking, the emotional spending, the belief that speed produces stability has remained remarkably consistent for thousands of years. And so has the alternative, the quiet household, the protected financial environment, the identity of guardian rather than pursuer, the daily discipline that asks, not how do I earn more, but what am I allowing to drain away? Wealth does not arrive suddenly. It does not announce itself. It does not reward urgency or noise or constant motion. It accumulates quietly in the spaces where discipline has removed the forces that destroy it. The wise do not chase wealth. They build the conditions in which wealth has no reason to leave. That is the vacuum discipline rule. That is what Solomon observed centuries before modern economies existed. And that is what the families who think in generations rather than pay cycles have understood all along. The question is no longer whether you understand it. The question is whether you are willing to build it. The wise do not chase wealth. They remove the systems that quietly take it away. Proverbs 13:11, Principle